What's up everyone, I'm Dono and this is How to Happy. In this video we're going to be talking about focusing on things that you can control. So imagine that you're sitting there and you're watching some kind of sporting event, and as the last few minutes of the game tick away, your team is winning. They've been playing pretty well, but it's a little too close for comfort. So you're watching the game, it's going, the minutes are ticking away, and at the very last second, the other team makes this incredible, miraculous play, boom, and your team loses, and you're just devastated. No, like, come on, oh! You're freaking out in a flurry of emotion, you toss your phone across the room and just like, utter all these different cuss words. To make it even worse, that was the championship game and your team lost just at the last second. So for the next, 3 or 4 days, you're just in this funk of just like ruminating about it. Like, oh man, I can't believe they lost. Like, are you serious? I've played a decent amount of sports, watched sports every once in a while. So I kind of understand those feelings when your team loses, getting like frustrated and kind of fired up. But the problem is when you let those kinds of things stick with you a lot longer than they need to. If you're not playing in the game, then you didn't even have any real influence on the outcome at all. You didn't influence anything that happened. So why would we let events like this that we don't have any control over stay with us for so long? So in this video, we're going to be talking about focusing on the things you actually can control. Because when you can't control something and you focus on it, it's really just a waste of your time. I'm definitely of the opinion that you can do a lot and create a lot of opportunities, but some things are simply going to be out of your control. The more you focus on these situations that you can't influence, the more deeply emotional and frustrated you're going to be, right? Going back to the game example, like, oh my gosh, why didn't he block the pass? He was right there. If you're thinking about that days and days later, there's nothing you can do or could have done to change that. There's nothing for you to learn out of what happened. There's nothing for you to modify. It's really just burning your time. I won't go too deep into kind of creating opportunities, but if you know that your opportunities for influencing a situation have kind of run out, it's better to move your attention elsewhere. So for example, like that game, first of all, you couldn't have controlled the outcome to begin with, but also the more you think about it, it's further and further in the past, and you just had no chance of influencing the past. The past has already happened. Let's go over a few examples of things you do and don't have control over. For example, you have control over how you treat other people, but you'll never have control over how other people treat and feel about you. Of course, you can act in certain ways that makes it more likely that people are going to like you, but at the end of the day, you can't make them do anything. You can't have control over any of their actions or feelings. So you could ask someone, for example, for directions, and they could either give you those directions or they could say like, are you an idiot, really? You're lost. Either one of those reactions you couldn't have changed, but you could have asked both of them the exact same thing and gotten two entirely different outcomes. So it's something that's just out of your control. Everyone is going to be interpreting what you do through their own lens and then react based on that. So you can do, like I said, a certain amount to try to come off a certain way, but if they interpret it differently and then act on it, that's out of your control. If they're just naturally, more helpful or naturally more rude, that's not something that you can influence. However, if we flip the situation and someone asks you for directions, regardless of whether they ask you in a way that's nice or a way that's rude, you are fully in control of how you react to the situation. You're in control of whether you treat them well or you kind of brush them off. Let's move on to another example. So if you're driving and someone cuts you off, you can't control that they cut you off. The only thing that you have control over is how you react to being cut off. Once the event happens, it's already over, it's in the past. There's nothing that you can possibly do to change it. All you can control is what you do in the moments afterward. Even if you just start screaming at them, you try to flash your lights at them, get them to pull over, yada, 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 it doesn't change that they cut you off. All you can control is what you do. Adding on to that, you'll often hear people say stuff like, oh my gosh, that person makes me so mad. But really, you're the one in control of that frame. You're the one who gets to interpret actions and then react to them. So if someone cuts you off, you can create a narrative for yourself that either says, oh, wow, they meant to do that, I hate them. Or you can create a narrative that say, wow, they may not have seen me. That strongly influences how you're going to feel about the situation. So they're not necessarily making you mad, but you choose to take an interpretation that ends with you being mad. You get to control whether or not that event is something that you focus on and becomes an important part of your day, or if you just let it pass through. In the grand scheme of things, how much does it really matter? Another example, you can't control if you get laid off from your job, but you can control how quickly you go out and start looking for a new job. So you've probably heard this before, people get laid off and they just go from place to place kind of telling people what happened, and their sole focus is on, oh my gosh, I got laid off and this is so unfair and I hate it and I've been working at this place for so long. But again, it's something that's already happened. You've already been laid off, so you can't do anything to change it. Yeah, maybe you could go try to ask and see if they'll give you a different job or something like that, but that's getting back into your control and focusing on actions you can take. So the more time that you spend kind of focused on, oh, I got laid off and it means this, this, and this, the less time you have to go out and actively look for a new job. You're in control, again, of your reaction, of how you spend your time. You're not in control of the event that already happened. And the more that you focus on it, the more upset you're gonna get and the less time you have to do other things. You know, the more you focus on how frustrated you are, that doesn't put resumes in potential employers' hands. Let's move on to another example. You can't control if you think someone who's undeserving is successful. What you can control is how hard you work to become successful. So if you think about, some, I don't know, trust fund type kids, right? And you spend a bunch of time thinking like, wow, it's so unfair that they have all this money and all this stuff and they never have to work. I mean, it might be unfair, but it's also something out of your control. You focusing on that doesn't do anything for you. The only thing you can do is look at your circumstances and work on those. An example that kind of falls in the same line is you'll often hear people who are really upset about certain musicians, right? They'll say, oh, wow, that guy really sucks. I don't know how he has so many followers, yada, 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 yada. And I've definitely been guilty of that myself. But basically, the more time you spend doing that, it doesn't affect their popularity at all. All it does is waste your time. And if you're an aspiring musician or aspiring to something else, that's time that you could use to work on something else, something that you actually have control over. I think that's plenty of examples for you to kind of get the point. I want to make one other point though, and that's don't use this framework as an excuse to not get things done. There are a ton of opportunities out there and a ton of things you can work on and influence, right? Because we all know people who basically say everything is out of their control, like, I can't do that because of this, and I can't do that because of this, and they go on and on and on. That's not really what I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about is there are some things that are genuinely out of your control. So kind of try to pay attention and distill out what is and is not in your control, and then focus on those things that are in your control, because that's what you actually have an impact on. But don't just use it as an excuse to never do anything ever, because that's equally unproductive. In every situation, you're gonna have some control, even if it's just trying to control your thoughts and the way that you're framing the situation. Focusing on what you control is a key component to happiness, because otherwise you're just left up to the whims of the world, right? If you only focus on these things that you can't control, these outcomes that you have no influence on, then you basically either have a good day or a bad day based on just random stuff that happens. Or if you just keep focusing on one thing, you just continually have a bad experience about something that has already happened and you can't change. Knowing what you can control gives you a lot more power to change things in your life. So as you practice and get a little bit better at identifying what you can and can't control, just continue to work towards the things that you can. And that's really the main thrust of this video, is basically to reflect on some of the things that make you upset and understand whether or not you can control them. And if you can, in what ways can you actually have an impact on the outcome? Because again, like what I was saying before, people's actions, how people feel about you, you can't necessarily control that. You could be incredibly nice to someone and they still don't like you. That's not something that you should focus on. You should focus on what you can control. You can control your behavior and your actions and your thoughts. All right, let's move on to the exercise portion. So for this video, the exercise is to write down one thing that you're in control of in your life and one thing that you're not. Try to be as specific as possible so that it's something with a little bit of meaning for you. And the more that you do this exercise, the better you're gonna get at understanding what is and what is not in your control. That's all I've got for this video. As always, if you have any questions, comments, topics you want me to cover, put them down in the box below. Beyond that, I will see you next time. See ya.
You can check out more content at howtohappy.com. Also, don't forget to subscribe so you can stay up to date on the videos. We've also got a Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook that you can check out. Reflect, take action, and enjoy life. See you next time.